This is going to be strictly a slideshow, essentially no science. And I think maybe the one justification for it is that this has been long enough ago, so that I think most of the audience here were not even born at the time that I wintered over. In fact, it's been 56 years since my wintering, and that turns out to be longer than the time between the heroic era of Antarctic exploration, Scott and Shackleton and Amundsen, basically 1912 to 1960 is only 48 years. And from my wintering to now, it's 56 years. So if there's any justification for this talk, it's because it's ancient history. So I should probably, before I start, also say that the reason I went to Antarctica is something like this. I had graduated from college, had done my military service, and worked for about a year as a mechanical engineer at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft in East Hartford, Connecticut, and I was a test engineer. And I quickly got kind of tired of the industrial scene, and I wanted to find something more interesting to do. And out of the blue, one of the fellows that I worked with saw an announcement on a bulletin board, and he wrote down the address, and he said there were some people looking, there was a organization looking for people to go to Antarctica. And that's really all I knew. And I thought, well, this sounds interesting. I wrote them a letter with a vita and told them who I was, what my background was. And they were looking, number one, for physicists. This was the Air Force Cambridge Research Lab, who was running the U.S. Antarctic program's aurora observing program. And this was after the IGY, the International Geophysical Year, at which time there had been a decision to continue to operate 4 of the stations, and so they needed 4 observers. And as I said, they were looking, number one, for physicists. If they couldn't find physicists, they were happy to have electronic engineers. As it turned out, they took just about any warm body, because both the fellow that I was across the desk from and I, who were mechanical engineers, were hired. So actually 2 of them were physicists and 2 of us were. So I'm just saying that I was far from being an auroral scientist. And we spent about 2 months going through a training program to learn what to do, and basically we were observers and technicians on a pre-cooked program to make aurora observations. So Antarctica, and let's see if I can get this. Byrd Station is right here at 80 degrees south, 120 west, and 120 west is directly south of California. The station there is at an elevation of about 5,000 feet, 1,500 meters, and the landscape is 360 degrees of flat snow. So this is back in the day of propeller airplanes and military logistics for the program. So we boarded military transport airplanes at Davisville in Rhode Island, and we had a stop in Honolulu for refueling, and then another stop in Fiji, and finally landed at Christchurch in New Zealand. And this is some of the people who were in the group that I wintered with. First thing we did is go to the park in downtown Christchurch, and 5 of us here in the picture with a very well-known statue of Captain Robert Scott. This was the Lockheed Super Constellation that was used to fly people from Christchurch to McMurdo Station, and airplanes at McMurdo landed on a runway carved out of on the ice shelf at McMurdo on wheels, as you can see. We took off, and a few minutes later there was a big oil leak on the airplane, and they turned around and came back, and everybody's waiting for them to fix the oil leak here. And eventually we actually saw the ice shelf. This is just as we were coming in after a 10-hour flight or so from Christchurch. And here is my first glimpse of Antarctica itself out of the window on the right side of the airplane, Transantarctic Mountains. Here we are on the runway at McMurdo Station. Mount Erebus is an active volcano, the only active volcano in Antarctica. In the background, the airplane there is an Air Force C-124 cargo airplane. They were used to parachute cargo at the inland stations. And here we are getting off the airplane, and sleds taking us up to McMurdo Station. This is McMurdo Station in November 1959. Observation Hill is there in the background. This McMurdo now and for the last 40 years has been a much bigger establishment than this. This was pretty primitive at the time. Looking from McMurdo across the ice shelf, and you can see the road from the airstrip to the station. Main Street, McMurdo. This is the Chapel of the Snows, and again, well, won't bother with that. At that time, there were actually still dogs used for, in fact, in the American program, only for amusement. The New Zealanders and the Brits and the Australians actually still use dog for transport. And as I said, in the American program, they were just pets, basically. This was our first day or two at McMurdo, exploring the neighborhood. The ship there is not a wreck, it's a fuel tank, a ship which was used as a fuel tank for the station. And we went to the hut of the Scott 1912 expedition, which was obviously a historical place, and there's a plaque there. And since then, many years later, it's been excavated, renovated, and so on. This is Scott Base, the New Zealand station, which is right a mile or two from the American station, both on Ross Island, in close proximity. And I should say that McMurdo Station was and still is the logistics base for the U.S. Antarctic program, and the New Zealanders had basically a scientific station much smaller as I said, in the same neighborhood. And some more sightseeing, seals. And by the way, I never saw a penguin all the time I was in the Antarctic until perhaps 10 years later. I did a lot of field work in the Antarctic over the years afterward, but it took several years before I saw even a single penguin. Well, this is just topography, again with the C-124 and just a few shots of ice ridges, and again Mount Erebus in the background. Here is most of the scientific crew. We had 10 scientists and 11 Navy people wintered over at Byrd Station, and here are 2, 4, 6 of the scientists. Back to the runway, the airport, if you like. You can see Mount Erebus in the background, a little bit of smoke actually coming out. Having a problem. Okay, it went forward even though I pushed the backward button. There's the Will She Do It. That was a twin engine, piston engine airplane, a modified DC-3 in fact, which was the standard aircraft at the time for logistic purposes in Antarctica. And this is the first glimpse of Byrd Station, and you can see there are only 2 things showing above the surface. The rectangular thing is the Aurora Tower, which was my office, and the dome on the left is a radio receiving antenna for weather balloons. And here's a close-up of the station with the astronomical position observed here and so on. You can see that it didn't hit exactly 80 south and 120 west. The distance is actually about 3/4 of a mile north of 80 south, and it's almost exactly 120 west. Diagram of the location of the layout of the station, and basically it's a passageway with buildings going in both directions off the main central passageway. This was just snow, and these were prefabricated buildings, and you can see the labels and various things. Here's my bedroom right here, and here's the Aurora Tower, and the other things you can read there. The entrance to at the south end of the central passage, and you can see, you'll see in the next slide or two, the amount of snow that had accumulated over the 2 years that the station had been there when we came. The station was first occupied in the summer of 56, 57. And here we have conscripted volunteers clearing off the accumulated snow, and some construction here of a new entranceway on the north end of the passageway. This is the Ravensan Tower being rebuilt. You can see the frame for it, and was just taken apart and rebuilt, one section of it. And then in that summer, there was a tractor train, D8 Caterpillar tractors, pulling 20-ton sleds, and they brought 2 new buildings to be set up at the station and prefabricated.
They come from McMurdo?
I'm sorry?
From McMurdo?
From McMurdo, yes. So that route had been pioneered in the IGY, and it's about an 800-mile trek from McMurdo. And when it was pioneered, there was some problems with getting around crevasses and so on. They had to do some blasting to fill in crevasses to negotiate the track. But that was 2 years before this. And here it's very graphic. You can see this is the level of the floor of the existing buildings and the passageway that I mentioned. And you can see how much snow there is. And this is simply drift snow from 2 years. Anytime you have an obstacle on the surface and there's a wind, it just piles up, and what happened here is it just has drifted in to that extent. And you can see the construction of the foundation for the new buildings. And then there were some new generators to replace existing ones for base power. And then, as soon as everything was finished, next snowstorm, it's starting all over again, drifting. And that is a short time later, more drifting, excavating the entrance to the garage, the vehicle repair shop. The one good thing about the drifting snow was that it was very easy to get snow to melt, to make water. All you had to do was dump it down a chute. And we had a system where anytime you either wanted to take a shower or wash clothes, you had to fill the snow melter. And the snow melter was just a box, maybe 5 feet on a side with basically a radiator in it that was used to, radiator was powered from the exhaust of the electrical generator to melt water to melt snow to make water. And here are a few pictures of the logistic support from the aircraft. Byrd Station was in a position where a lot of the field geophysical exploration of West Antarctica was based at Byrd Station, and so there was a lot of activity in and out, day in and day out, and this is one of the more important cargoes. Mail was always a big thing to look forward to. So the doctor was a Navy officer who was the officer in charge and had other duties. I don't think he ever had any medical duties to talk about, but he did things like sort mail.
Can I ask a question?
I'm sorry?
The next photo that you're in, can you point out? I want to see what you look like.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The next time you're in a photo, can you point yourself out?
Okay. I think, yes, I do appear in a few of them. Yeah. Sure. Remember, I was 56 years younger. So these are not bombs, obviously. These are called JATO, They're actually, which stands for jet-assisted takeoff, but in fact they're rockets, they're not jets. And they're solid propellant rockets which are attached to the airplanes in order to give a very high short time thrust for takeoff. And this is the belly of the C-47 or R-4D as the Navy calls them. And here it's a sequence of a takeoff. You can see the rockets are firing and the thing is taking off. You see the rockets there. If you're sitting in an airplane when those rockets are firing, it sounds like 100 people shoveling gravel at the bottom of the airplane. And it creates this huge cloud of not so much smoke, but mostly just loose snow. And this is a little bit later in the season, actually, but this airplane was coming into land and it was very bad weather. They got a little lower than they thought they were. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but the airplane obviously is a total loss. And incidentally, one of my supply crates was on that airplane and it was marked "Do Not Drop." And instead they crashed it instead of dropping it. And I don't remember whether this is Christmas or New Year's, but it's obviously a party celebrating, I think it was New Year's actually. And everybody's having a good time. Both the civilians are all in the checkered shirts, the military are in the olive drab. And then this is one very significant development in the logistics was the introduction of a C-130 Hercules, which is a 4-engine turboprop airplane with a large tailgate and huge capacity compared to the R-4Ds. And the Air Force in the first summer brought down a squadron of these things from Greenland as a test operation, and NSF had acquired 4 of them, which the Navy operated starting the following season. So this is the back end of a C-130 unloading some fuel drums. That's me. It's just a box of supplies that I was bringing in. And there was a kind of a ramp, what am I trying to say, a conveyor belt on a ramp into the building, and here people are just having fun riding the conveyor belt. The amateur radio was a very big plus, a very important morale factor, and this is one of the electrical engineers doing some maintenance on the antenna for the amateur radio. We had something called phone patching, which is essentially getting a hold of an amateur radio operator in the US by radio from Antarctica, and he would connect to people's home telephone numbers, and that was the way people talked to their friends and relatives. And because it's a one-way transmission and then a return transmission, people have to get used to saying over before and then wait for the other guy to reply. So this is some of the activity going on. This is a large field of accumulation stakes that's being measured. That is a Tucker snowcat, a relatively small one, and that was one of the standard vehicles that was used locally and for overland traverses. And because the aurora program really couldn't be run during the daylight because you can't see aurora when it's daylight, I actually didn't have very much to do from the time I got there until about February. So I cadged rides to a lot of places just for amusement, and I got here is a place in the Tony Mountains, which is toward the coast from Byrd Station, and this is a resupply from by air for a traverse party, and that is one of the larger snowcats which was used for these traverse operations. And here, fuel being transferred. And as I said, Byrd Station was a sort of center of flying activity in West Antarctica, and there was aircraft maintenance outdoors. And this is a P-2V, which was a Navy long-range submarine reconnaissance aircraft, and it was on skis as well, and it was used to do aerial photography in Antarctica, and it was being maintained here at Byrd Station. And again, they used JATO for takeoff, so that was a JATO takeoff. And one thing I got to participate in was a reconnaissance for aerial photography north from the station to the coast, and we actually went to a place that had never been, this is obviously floating ice on the coast, and these are the Jones Mountains, which had never been seen before. This was the first trip to see the Jones Mountains in the Thurston Peninsula area. And then we came south along the Ellsworth Mountains, which are considerably east of Byrd Station, and we actually landed at a nunatak that had not been visited before, mostly for geological reconnaissance. This is a very well-known Antarctic geologist, Campbell Craddock, and I was his assistant. That's me assisting. You see, I'm actually carrying a load of rocks. Then comes February and end of the summer season. This is the last airplane getting ready to depart for the year from Byrd, and wistfully watching the airplane go by and 9 months of isolation coming up. And among other things, we have this huge pile of scrap, basically, but just piles and piles of, I always objected to this waste of there's crates of stuff. We also had a fairly large used car parking lot. I think there were 3 D8 tractors, great big Caterpillars, and several, as you can see, several snowcats, and this thing here is called the Weasel. That's a World War II amphibious vehicle. All these things are tracked so they can go over the snow. And then, of course, the sun starts to set, and contrary to what you might think, the ice sheet is not just blank white at all. The colors are spectacular, as you can see there. This is one of the sunsets, and the moon coming up on the other side. And again, just some sun setting, lowering the flag. And here are a few shots of activity in the station. This is obviously the radio. At that time, most of the official communications were done by Morse code, if you can believe it. There was some voice communication, but a lot of the official traffic was Morse code and teletype. And one of the busiest people was the cook, and here he is doing his thing. Every possible occasion, birthdays, holidays, and so on, we did things like this, having a cake. IHTFS, I won't spell that one out. I hate this effing place. This is, and the buildings, the quarters, the station in general were very comfortable. We had a bathroom with showers, sink, laundry facilities. This is my cubicle. Notice how neat it is.
Very tidy.
A lounge, library, and a record player, and so on. This is the meteorology program, which consisted of surface observations of temperature and wind, and as I said, the radio sonde, and every 6 hours they sent up a weather balloon, and this is a generator for making the hydrogen gas to fill the balloons. This is the chief meteorologist and also the chief scientist on the station, and weather balloon coming out and being released, and there it goes. You can see this is the box that had the radio transmitter on it. It transmits temperature, pressure, humidity, and it's tracked so that it gives you the wind direction. And then there's radio tracking equipment for the balloon. This is a pit which had been dug a couple of years before to do glaciological investigations, and it was essentially abandoned by the time that we were there. Here are just a few pretty pictures of ice crystals. And this looks to me like, I mean, it's an icicle, but it looks to me like a figure of the Madonna if you use a little bit of imagination. And then there was, the winter consisted of refurbishing equipment, getting ready for the next season. This is the Travers geophysicist, and he's working on the name escapes me at the moment. Seismic sounding equipment, which is used setting off explosives and timing the time that it takes for it to go down and back through the ice sheet gives you an idea of the thickness of the ice. This guy isn't asleep, it just the pictures, eyes happen to be shut. He's at the moment checking time signal from WWE. And here's me again. This is in the Aurora Tower, and the Aurora program consisted of operating a couple of instruments and doing visual observations. This particular instrument is called an all-sky camera, which is basically a half-spherical mirror which is reflected, which looks at the whole sky, and that image is reflected on a plane mirror above it, which projects that image through a small hole in that spherical mirror, and then the pictures are recorded on a modified 16 millimeter film camera. And so one of my jobs was obviously keeping the cameras loaded with film, developing the film, and we also had a piece of equipment called a spectrograph, and it caused a lot of problems, but it also recorded on film. I won't bother you with the details. And the other thing was, well, this is just keeping track of what I was doing, but the other thing was visual observing, and that was through a plexiglass dome, and there's a little alidade there to measure elevation angles. And we had IBM cards, punch cards, to record the various properties of the aurora that were happening. And I have a few pictures here of aurora, which are really spectacular. And one reason that Byrd Station was located where it was is because it was right at the maximum of auroral activity. And so we had all these things are time exposures on the order of 1 minute. So you can see and they're difficult to photograph properly, but you get some idea of the kind of displays that we saw day in and day out. Very spectacular. And the other thing is that during the winter, the moon is so bright that you could literally read a newspaper by the moonlight. So here are a couple of pictures of moonlight. And again, the Aurora Tower, the Raywin sound equipment. And then for amusement, we had things like ping pong and shuffleboard and hobby type of stuff. And beer was a very important recreational item, as you can see here. As I said, amateur radio was another big recreational affair. And movies, we had 16 millimeter versions of commercial popular movies, and we had one movie, enough movies to have a different one every night, which was provided by the Navy system. And then there were things like, practical considerations like getting your hair cut. We had sort of rotation for doing maintenance of cleaning of the station, dishwashing, and here I am, mopping.
Nice beard.
Then comes mid-winter day, June 21st, and that was a big occasion. And notice there was one bottle of whiskey for each guy. This was called medicinal brandy. And I've always been an amateur photographer, and so I sort of got stuck with doing all the official photography, and these are all the people who wintered, and we had all the years, every year there was a display like this. Another holiday to celebrate. This is kind of very usual pastime, and some of us had a little more beer than necessary. And then, of course, eventually the sun starts coming back. And again, it's not just a white emptiness, it's beautiful. And the flag goes back up. Sunrise coming. And Byrd is a fairly windy place, and this is probably not a very high wind, but I took these pictures just to show, it doesn't take much wind to just completely hide the place just because of the blowing snow. And then at the end of the winter, crawl back out. There was practically no outside activity during the winter months. There were a few things that needed to be done, like bringing in fuel for the generators and the heating, but very little activity outside. So the cold weather really didn't make much of an impact because you just spent the time indoors. And again, things drift over. This is the result of a year's drifting of that crashed airplane. And then the new summer coming up, and the C-124s here parachuting various kinds of equipment, a lot of lumber, all kinds of things. And then the Navy's new C-130s. This is the first flight after the winter, so it's a big, exciting time. Mail, first thing that's very important. And then Byrd Station was the center of the traverse operation, so here they're getting ready to go on the geophysical traverses in the summer of 60-61. And before the traverse operation got underway, this man here is Charles Bentley, who was a very well-known geophysicist from the University of Wisconsin. This is Admiral Tyree, who was the officer in charge of the operation in the years that I was there. And the purpose of this trip was to locate the place to put the new Byrd Station, which was being built that summer to replace the old station, which had been so damaged by the drifting snow that it was really not possible to keep it going any longer. And then they're out here laying out the new station, big construction camp. And then this is the scientific traverse getting underway, the field party. And this is how the people looked when they got back after 2 months in the field with no washing, no shaving, no hair cutting. This picture is of interest only because this man here is Sir Charles Wright, who was a member of the Scott expedition from 1912. And he was probably in his late 70s or maybe early 80s by then, and still a very active and vigorous man. Unfortunately, I didn't have the presence of mind to get a picture of his face, which I should have done. And then other field parties came along. This is one of the people from the Institute of Polar Studies at Ohio State, which and the party was led. This picture doesn't give a very good view, but this is the founder of what is now the Byrd Center and used to be started as the Institute of Polar Studies, and Dr. Richard Goldthwait was the director and founder of the place. And I think that's probably reasonable time to quit. I may have one more slide here because I put this in because I usually get asked about the weather. How cold was it? Well, here's a graphic illustration, and you can see the red are the temperatures, the green are the wind. And you can see the maximum, the average, the minimum month by month. And the coldest day was minus 66 degrees Fahrenheit. But that, you can see it's a low here, and that lasted only a few days. But in general, you know, from March to September in the winter, it's down there, you know, in the 60s. And as I said, it was a windy place. You can see the maximum and the average wind. Okay, I think I should stop there. I'd be more than happy to try to answer questions if there are any. So fire away. If there are no questions, thanks very much for paying attention.
The one diagram of the camp had all the oil.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Originally, the station was built, the buildings were put on the surface, and the spaces between the buildings, I mean, creating this central passage and the spaces between the buildings were all roofed over, and because, you know, it was known that it was going to drift over, and so the point was to just let it drift over, and eventually got to the point where the empty oil barrels were used to support the roof. Eventually those things started getting crushed, and they put in 6x6 posts to hold the place up. And we had you know, that's a homemade plumbing in all the buildings, because the snow melted and leaked through cracks in the roofs, and we had little rubber tubes, drill a hole in the floor and drain the water from the roof down into the basement. Okay, well, thank you very much.